shall, if possible, be referred to the President of the Senate before commencement of the day's sitting, and the President of the Senate shall refuse to allow the claim unless he is satisfied that the matter is definite and urgent. Order 52, Order 50. Order 52, I read, notice shall not be dispensed with in the case of a motion or in respect of any other proceeding for which notice is required, except with the consent of the President of the Senate and the general assent of the senators present. And what I have here today, we are marking the War Aids Day. And as this is very important issue, that health-related issue, I feel that the Senate will have opportunity to take a stand on this fight. Mr. President, the good people of Enugu North Central District of Enugu State. Mr. President, motion on War Aids Day. The Senate minded that the groundbreaking report of the National HIV/AIDS Indicator and Impact Survey, NICE, was unveiled by President Muhammad Buhari in March this year. Fear have been rife in the HIV community that intervention funders may leave Nigeria for places where the deadly virus is yet to be kept at bay. This Senate notes that Nigeria is currently funding the HIV prevention and treatment services in only 2 states, with the foreign donors footing the bill in the remaining 34 states and Abuja, a development that is very appalling and embarrassing. This Senate satisfied that NICE reports showed that HIV prevalence in the country dropped from 2.8% to 1.4% amongst adults aged 15 to 49 years, a feat which Nigeria is presently well applauded, and with a population of 1.9 million people living with HIV in Nigeria, over 1 million of the above figure are currently accessing treatment to achieve viral suppression. This Senate concerned that with the appreciable control of this epidemic and decreasing expectation of further shrinking, is the naked truth that the usual funding from foreign donors will equally shrink, leaving Nigeria to battle 37/37 in funding the management and care of people living with HIV, and therefore necessitates putting in place mechanisms to ensure that resources are available for continuity. This Senate worried about the sustainability of the fight against HIV infection and control in Nigeria, as it is anticipated that someday the funding partners may pull out of the country. It becomes imperative that private sector involvement in raising the needed funds to support the government at the federal and state levels. This Senate informed that in commemorating the 2019 World AIDS Day, the National Agency for Control of AIDS, NACA, launched the Nigerian National Undetectable Equals to Untransmittable U2U campaign. The U equals to U is an informational campaign about how effective HIV medications are at preventing sexual transmission of HIV. U equals to U means that people living with HIV who achieve and maintain an undetectable viral load, that is, the amount of HIV in the blood, by taking and adhering to their HIV medication as prescribed, cannot sexually transmit the virus to others. This Senate counsels that the issue of stigma is very important in the battle against HIV/AIDS in Nigeria, since it may affect patient attendance at healthcare centers for obtaining antiretroviral medications and regular checkups. Stigmatization and possible discrimination creates an unnecessary culture of secrecy and silence based on ignorance and fear of victimization. Accordingly, this Senate will resolve as follows. 1. To encourage the federal government to ensure adequate funding of NACA for the fight and control of the spread of HIV in the country. 2. To appeal to the organized private sector in the country to embrace the fight against HIV/AIDS by partnering with government to fund this exercise. 3. To appeal to the general public not to stigmatize and discriminate against our brothers and sisters living with HIV. And 4, finally, to appeal to all adults to feel free to test and know their HIV status. And accordingly, all is advised that prevention is still better than cure, as unprotected sex is one of the surest ways of contracting the dreaded virus. I so move.
Of Senate, distinguished colleagues, my name is Chimaroke Namani. I represent Enugu East Senatorial Zone. I commend Senator Otazi for this motion. I believe I have a responsibility to draw attention to Nigerians on the issue of reporting and disease surveillance as far as HIV is concerned. If you look at the motion, he did mention some data in terms of reporting. If you look at Nigeria today, the poverty index is 72% northwest, 71% northeast, 67% north central, and keeps dropping until 26% southeast. The same with school enrollment. It is paradoxical that if you look at the disease surveillance, HIV surveillance, the reported marked drop in the northern states compared to the southern states. So you have drop in HIV in areas where there is more poverty and where there is less school enrollment. So I believe the authorities need to look at the issue of reporting. Maybe there are difficulties in terms of disease reporting in these areas, or because of cultural practices and stigmatization, there is difficulty in terms of reporting. So I believe that the National Nigerian Primary Healthcare Agency and other related agencies need to look seriously at the issue of disease surveillance and HIV reporting, so that the so-called drop in these areas may not be due to cultural practices and issues of stigmatization. So with this, I second this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Senator Matthew Rogide. I represent the group for Edo South Central District. Well, first, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, let me lend my voice, in thanking Senator Otazi for bringing, this motion. Senator Namani has just, has mentioned, made his contribution as a medical doctor, and I very much agree with him. But I want to say that, from experience and practice over the years, HIV, when the news broke around 1985, and then, of course, medications were put in the market, to counter those who were HIV positive. Over the time, what we have observed, and coming to this time, when about two or 3 days ago, the WHO mentioned that they have only about 22 million people living with HIV in the world. One, of course, we say want to praise all the efforts, of governments and agencies that have been concerned with the control, of this disease. I believe that it is not time for us to, to shout uhuru, because some of these figures that have been bandied around, I know they might not just be correct, because investigations that have been carried out, particularly amongst our rural populace, they really have not really been up to date. Institutions like this, in those days, if people were going to take up jobs, you needed to determine their HIV status. But that one again is not too prevalent. So I am still saying too that we should not be laid back. A lot of our citizens must still subject themselves to screening. HIV, like any other disease, early detection, of course, will lead to control and eradication. So our citizens still must be advised, at centers where they can carry out, tests. It's to subject themselves to test. There is nothing that stigmatizes anybody about infection with HIV. It is now a disease that you can control. With the advent of drugs, the antiretroviral drugs, like he said, it's a lot more cumbersome, for people to show compliance when administering these drugs. In those days, you could pack up to about 18 tablets, of antiretroviral drugs, the way they were, you swallow at a time, and take them about 3, 4, or 5 times a day. But now, these drugs, a lot of them have been combined, and our people, they can be administered and they will show compliance. But I want to advise too that, at this time, when the news broke in those days, government found it very difficult because the drugs were very expensive. Now, a lot of these drugs have been subsidized. NACA that came on board in Nigeria, a lot of, international donors came, USAID, WHO, UNICEF, all of them made contributions to Nigeria. And the government at that time too was very serious because the disease was ravaging our populace. So I still believe that governments too must still, continually fund, funding so that we don't have a relapse of the disease, so that our people don't get infected. We have had different demographics, just like he said, in this country. The northern part of this country, the south, in fact, even states, where we have found out that the prevalence rate has been very high. I think we don't want to mention those ones now so that they don't get stigmatized. The federal government, the state governments too must collaborate efforts to ensure that these drugs are still made available to people who have gone through to certify their states. Thank you very much.
Very much. Can we go to the prayers? Ensure adequate funding of NACA for the fight and control of the spread of HIV in the country. Those in favor of prayer 1, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 2, to appeal to the organized private sector in the country to embrace the fight against HIV/AIDS by partnering with government to fund this exercise. Those in favor of this prayer, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 3, to appeal to the general public not to stigmatize and discriminate against our brothers and sisters living with HIV. Those in favor of this prayer, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. And prayer 4, to appeal to all adults to feel free to test and know their HIV status, and accordingly, all is advised that prevention is still better than cure, as unprotected sex is one of the surest way of contracting the dreaded virus. Those in favor of this prayer, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it.